So, as it turns out, I think I will be able to get this one out before Christmas Day, because while it is right after I finished work, this one actually isn't too long, to be honest with you, so I should be able to do this one. It should be fairly similar in length to the Osgiliath siege that I put up not too long ago. It was actually this morning, I think, so you can date this one. This is the 23rd of December that I'm recording this one. But yes, this is going to be a 3v2, and this is a scenario from the Discord, and it is essentially a little encampment here. There are a few sort of circles, they put up barricades, a sort of hastily assembled defence against the orcs that surround them. So it's an interesting little sort of concept where you've got these sort of like rings of barricades, and there's sort of little ways in, and there's also these rocks as well which block the way and also block arrow fire. I was wondering how they got here, but there is actually sort of grassland in the distance over there, so I think that this is a map that is in development, so I think there might be a little bit more terrain going on as time goes on, but for the time being, the centre of the map is here, and this is going to be a 3v2. So we'll start off with the defending armies, and Bobo 16k is playing as the Kingdom of Rune, and the Loke-Gamp Rim are going to make up a big part of this defence. As long as they don't get skirmished down by archers, these guys are going to be very difficult for the orcs to break down, provided they're backed up. Pikes are very effective in the current patch, provided they are of decent quality, and the Loke-Gamp Rim certainly are good quality pikes. Just in behind them we have the slightly lower end mainline infantry that Rune can field in the Runic Swiftblades. Of course, the primary difference between these guys and the Flag Rim is they do have less stats, they do have more men in the unit, but perhaps more crucially they are not AP, whereas the Loke Flag Rim of course are. And of course, forming the bulk of Rune's ranged power in this battle, we will have the Loknar Rim. These guys as archers are pretty decent for their cost, at least, you know, for mid-tier of course. Like high-tier archers are sort of king in the current patch, so they will shred these guys. But the volume of fire these guys can put down is pretty decent, and they have pretty decent stats all around. We also have some Loke Scion Rim. AP Spearmen. Higher tier AP Spears are good. These guys also look very cool. I do like the heavy dragon scale armour that these guys sport. There's also a couple of units of Gnar Rim out front over there. We also have more Gamp Rim and more Scion Rim. Moving back over to here, we have some Runic Swiftblades, and then further at the back we'll have more of the elite. So we do have the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, of course. These guys are very, very good against lightly armoured troops. They aren't effective against armour like most dual-wielding shock troops are, but they do have very nice stats. They're going to be difficult to kill off as well in melee, which is going to be pretty key. But fortunately for Rune, they don't lack for armour piercing elsewhere. And in particular we have the Carmel's Chosen. They might not have as many hit points as the equivalents from like Arnor for the Dismounted Dunedain Knights or the Wardens of the White Tower, but they are AP, which can make a big difference in a situation like this. They also look very cool indeed. And then just over here we have some Flag Rim, of course, the AP variant of the Runic Central Infantry units. These guys are really very effective. They don't have many men in the unit, at least compared to the other factions and the equivalents. So if you can keep them out of the arrow fire, they will do very, very well for themselves, particularly against the orcs, of course. And then over here we have more Swiftblades, 2 units of Swiftblades, and more Gnar Rim. So we've got, you know, a smattering of elites and then mostly sort of standard tier units. Pasternak here, who, you know, I think that he's actually new to the scenario Discord, because I think he had some issues getting it working. But it's good to see him here. He's playing as Umbar. He's got some Belagir archers. Overall, a decent archer unit. In terms of cost efficiency, they're probably the best choice for Umbar at the minute, because the Abrazanim Nardu Bawib are the ones that have less men in the unit, so they have less volume of fire. Despite being more expensive, oftentimes they can't pay for themselves as easily. The Belagir archers, on the other hand, can. We also have here the Belagir footmen. These guys are just sort of a standard spears. There's also the Narun Aru Royal Archers buried in that unit. The Belagir footmen are just a sort of standard spearmen. They are slightly worse, I believe, than the Gondor spearmen, but they are also slightly cheaper if my memory is correct. It's been a while since I got into the stats. I'm looking forward to doing that again. We've got the Belagir archers over here again. We've also got the Belagir halberds. As far as halberdiers go, the Belagir halberds are good, although they aren't quite as good as the Etalond halberdiers or the Ironfoot halberdiers. They still make up probably the most effective central unit that Umbar have. Umbar are a little bit underwhelming in the current patch, but the Belagir halberds are certainly a nice centre. The Narun Aru Royal Guard are another AP spear, although it's more of a trident than a spear. Then we also have the Castamir's Chosen, of course. They aren't AP like the Carmel's Chosen, but they do have an extra hit point and better stats, so they will be more suited to a defensive and atrocious battle, which this one could be. We also have the Abrazanim Nadu Tariq. These guys are AP. They don't have a lot of base attack though, so they are pretty much designed entirely around holding the line and sort of bleeding out your enemy's armoured troops that they will send in to try and crack your lines. In combination with the Halberdiers, this is going to be a very nice AP force they have. In addition to that, we also have the Corsair Savages with their very large great axes, the Abrazanim Narduzagar, the Nardu Bawib as well, which I've mentioned before, the Corsairs Dual Swordsman, which, you know, you don't actually get to see a lot of these guys up close, but they are essentially just a mainline infantry unit which trades some defence for more attack. Can work, but they are very vulnerable, of course, to archers, which is a bit of a problem in the current patch with how it works. Belagir Footmen, of course, Harbingers of Castamere, and more Royal Guard. So now we shall have a look at the attacking armies. Here in the south, on his own, on this approach, we have a lazy couch gamer who has got a Mordor army, and he's got the Uruk archers here at the front. He's got some Olag High. He's also got some Orc Maulers leading the way. These guys are very cost effective for what they offer you. You know, they obviously have pretty poor stats, but they only cost 200, and an armor piercing unit for only 200 in the current patch is a very wise investment indeed. And he's also got some Orc Raiders there. Not as good, but still going to act as fodder. Uruks, of course, decent mainline. And then moving further back, we have the Melkors Chosen. How useful these guys are going to be is questionable, simply because it's going to be difficult for them to worm their way in and be effective. I mean, there's a lot of pikes, there's a lot of halberds. I assume the Dragon's Wrath crossbows are hidden in there somewhere as well. We've got the Sauron's Will. Temple Inquisitors, on the other hand, will be very difficult for the defenders to stop. They don't have anything that can go toe-to-toe with it, really, even the Harbingers. Uruk Halberdiers, and then Morannon heavy units back here. There's a lot of Morannon, actually. So this is going to be a lot of numbers that are going to be brought to bear on the circle defence in the middle. Master Blaster, playing as the Orcs of Gundabad. He's got a lot of Orc Marauders here at the front there. They're AP, of course. Low values, but still. Bolg's champions as well. The cavalry, I still don't know how useful that's going to be with all of the pikes and crossbows around. Well, potentially crossbows anyway. Orc Fellas, similar story to the Orc Maulers. Very cheap, but they are AP. And then he's got the Rudar Savages. As I've said before, these guys are kind of like the Riddermark Axemen, only they are slightly more vulnerable, but they are also cheaper. And then back here we have the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders. So a lot of Master Blaster's army is weak to arrows, and then he's got his elite corps back here. Guardians of Khan Doom, Witch Realm Blackguard, Rudal Berserkers, the Gundabad at their this elite corps they have is so strong. Gundabad Guard, Black Uruks of Mountains, and Rudar Savages. So this is going to be difficult for the defenders to deal with, this Gundabad army in particular. I think all of those elites. And then finally we have Froggy playing as another Gundabad army. He's got Goblin Band. Goblin Band are not going to do much other than act as fodder, but it's good that this army is slightly less elite. We've also got some Orc Fellas over here. And then back here he has got some Trolls. He's also got some Orc Marauders though. Orc Marauders in bulk, some Black Uruk Warband as well. He's got some Black Uruks at the back. And then I assume his elites are over here. Guardians of Khan Doom, Witch Realm Blackguard, Witch Realm Pikemen, Scourge Raiders, Gundabad Guard, and Scourge Raiders. But he's got less units with hit points, so that might be key. But yes, it's not really terribly Christmassy because we are in the desert, but still. I'm also not entirely convinced that Santa Claus would be visiting either the Orcs of Mordor or the Easterlings of Rhûn. Doesn't seem like their sort of thing. Regardless, I imagine there is going to be some Dragon's Wrath crossbowman action in here. I would be disappointed if it wasn't. This is almost the perfect map for them. They could be used to such deadly effect. Again, these archers are out here. A bit exposed, but they will be able to get some nice suppressing fire. There's a lot of sort of vulnerable targets that they can go after in both of these armies. Like, going after the elite shielded units is not going to be worth it with your archers in this situation, because your elite infantry for the most part can deal with them. The only exception to that rule would be the Temple Inquisitors, of course. Temple Inquisitors so strong, you can see as they approach. There's no need to make cuts in this battle. I know they're just going to get right on with it. Lazy Couch Gamer moving forward. The Uruk Archers here could be a very effective tool. Again, he's going to be attacking Umbar, so some of the units that he could use, we've actually got some Blackguards out here, sort of that were hidden. Blackguards are another very effective unit. They're very good in melee, actually, if we go over and have a little look at them while the manoeuvring is still going on. What makes these guys so effective is they are a higher tier javelin units. They will do a lot of damage, but what really sets them apart is how good they are in melee. Like the Demons of the Desert are the other one. They're really the two standout javelin units in the current patch. The Elder Council, in theory, should join that list, but because they technically act as spearmen in melee, they can be a bit underwhelming once you commit them to the fight. But we shall see. You can see the dust being kicked up in the background. I do like how there's like sort of grassland over here, so we're like on the edge of the desert. And also there were the Carmel's shadow bows, so these guys were hidden at least. These guys, again, a little bit underwhelming for what they offer. Their cost is a little bit expensive for me. If I were to play a 1v1 as Rune, I wouldn't be bringing the shadow bows, of course. In a scenario, it doesn't really matter, but currently I think the shadow bows are a bit underwhelming. Like, at least the Hashari shadows are essentially the same melee stats as regular Hashari in melee. Oh, there's a bit of a see-through barricade over there. I hope the ones on the outside are not the same. It's actually the Bolgs champions over here as well. But yeah, that's what sets the Hashari shadows apart. The Carmel shadow bows, they're okay at range, but they're also very vulnerable in a skirmish fight. Again, I do apologise if I'm a little bit sort of listless. It's been a long day at work. A part-time job and university does take its toll on my ability to be as enthusiastic as I would like, and how enthusiastic this game deserves, to be honest with you, particularly now that hype is building for the next patch, and I am excited for that. So the Belagear archers are in range here, and they are going to be firing on the Uruk archers. The Uruk archers are in range as well, and I don't know what unit they're going for. If they're going for the Belagear halberdiers, then I would say that this is definitely a worthwhile target. Getting rid of some of those AP pole arms is going to be very important to Mordor's advance, because getting through them with your weight of numbers can work, but you're going to take horrendous casualties on the way through from all this AP. Going for the Castamirs chosen while they're in shield will probably not the best idea. Having said that, there are Temple Guard over there. They will do more damage, but as I've said before, the Temple Guard in the current patch, their damage is a little bit underwhelming. In the next patch, they will be one of the very, very few archers to retain the AP bonus. I don't even think they have an AP bonus at range in the current patch. I could be wrong about that, but meanwhile, on the other side, you can see that Bobo's sort of expeditionary force of archers is now pulling back. We can see that there are a few dead orcs on the approach, but most of these orcs are very low tier, so Master Blaster won't mind losing Goblin Band and Orc Marauders in the slightest. You can see that these Swiftblades, they need to get out of here. They're going to be overwhelmed. It might just be Goblin Band, but they're going to be able to pin these Swiftblades in place. And then these Swiftblades are going to get hammered by something a little bit more hardy. Meanwhile, if we look back over here, we can see that the melee assault is beginning. I'm glad that it's not just turning into a skirmish fight, and that we're going to be getting down to business very, very quickly. We can see that it's a unit of Orc Raiders and a unit of Orc Maulers coming forward, and the Orc Maulers are leading the way, which is good to see. This charge is going to be a little bit of a damp squib, though, by the looks of things. Nope, they've got up to charge speed, so that's decent. Again, this AP will it will make a mark on these Castamirs chosen and these Naru Na'aru Royal Guardsmen. Having said that, they will obviously still lose. And these sort of Orc Raiders adding some numbers to this push. Ultimately, they will be repulsed, however. The Uruk Archers not firing anymore. You can see these Carmel's shadow bows coming over from Bobo to help his ally out. And the Naru Na'aru Royal Archers. They do need to be careful. You know, it could be a good idea to turn these Naru Na'aru Royal Archers onto these Bolgs champions. Get rid of potentially cavalry just sort of running rampant within your lines. Meanwhile, what is going on here? These Swiftblades actually weren't able to get away. Either that or he just sort of went up to the wall so he couldn't be surrounded. Which, if you couldn't get them away, that is a good choice, because it means all of them will be facing the enemy, and against Goblin Band, Swiftblades will very quickly cut through them. Again, Swiftblades are not the best infantry in the world, but they will still do the job in this situation. And Froggy is sending forward yet more Goblin Band. The Goblin Band are sort of starting to sort of get in and around the formation, though, which might be bad for these Swiftblades, using their weight of numbers. And yeah, this is a good move. Just sort of getting your Goblins all in and around the unit so they can't present a united front to you. They will, of course, die very quickly, but as soon as these Orc Halberdiers get into the fight, it should start to turn away. And, you know, this is a unit of Swiftblades which is essentially just going to die. Having said that, these, you know, you can try and get in through these little gaps by the looks of things, which is interesting. Because you can see some of these Goblins are sort of moving in towards these Lok Sion Rim, which is neat. These Orc Halberdiers are trying to be engaged by these Swiftblades, but we shall see how that goes. Again, the cavalry is a bit of a wild card over here, and you can actually see that the Olag High are moving forward. I definitely wouldn't commit the Olag High unless you were sort of planning to commit en masse to multiple fronts, because you could be able to sneak these heavily armoured trolls into the archers behind. Meanwhile, you can see that the Olag High taking a real withering array of fire from the Carmel's shadow bows and the Belagear archers. There's also a unit of Uruks on the way forward, as well as a unit of Orc Maulers, which presumably routed off and have returned to the fight. These Orc Raiders have just been completely mulched by the Castamir's Chosen. The Olakai are coming in. Can they push their way through? One of them did. And it looks like he's going to leave them in melee, which is not where these trolls want to be, because they're in melee against AP spears and halberdiers. And over a long period of time in sustained combat, trolls do not have the punch that they used to in vanilla. This is going to lead to their demise. They will inflict a decent amount of casualties onto the Balagir halberds, but ultimately these trolls will fall by the wayside, and these Uruks and these Maulers are not supporting them directly enough or quickly enough. You can see the trolls are already all bloodied up, mostly as a result of the arrow fire, admittedly, and now the Corsair Savages are coming in to put some more pressure on. We can see, however, on the other hand, you can see these Bolgs Champions are moving forward. The cavalry does have a way into the settlement over here. There are some Shadow Guard. These Orc Marauders, they're sort of busting through the settlement. It's difficult to see where the walls are solid and where they're not, but I suppose this is fine because there are gaps in between the carts. You can see these Orc Marauders engaging with the Swift Blades. As the fight goes on, it's going to be difficult for Rune, I think, to really hold back Gundabad from all of these well, it's not really a choke point at this point. If all of these areas are able to sort of be accessed, you can also see that these Bolgs Champions did charge in. They got a decent amount of casualties inflicted on the Shadow Guard, but the Bolgs Champions don't really have the staying power and sustained melee to keep up that fight. Having said that, it's going to be very difficult for the defenders to sort of keep all of their defensive points. You can see that for the most part, a lot of these Scion Rim are going to be able to rip through these Orc Marauders, but it's the attritional damage these guys are going to be doing. And when the elites of Gundabad come forward, I think that's going to be the wrecking ball that really just puts paid to all this defenders. All the defenders' work, I should say. Meanwhile, I do think that Lazy Couch Gamer has missed a bit of a trick here, because he is really focusing on one choke point alone, which is playing into the defender's hands. What he should be doing is sort of dividing up his sort of fodder units to attacking this choke point here perhaps, and this one here, and this one here, and then if he wants to focus on one point, then put your elite troops in through one way, but you need to engage on multiple fronts, I feel. You know, there's a reason why there's a lot of ways in. If you focus on one, you're really sort of playing into the defender's hands a little bit, I think. And also you can see that the trolls, long dead, they did manage to do a decent amount of damage, but the Castamir's Chosen are still here in force. And you can see that the addition of these Corsair Savages on the front lines were probably what finished off the trolls. And also these Uruks over here, defeat seems certain. There's still a lot of these Naru Na'aru Royal Guard as well on the front line. So these two elite units still in decent health, still going, and they have dealt with a troll unit already. So they're doing a good job. Meanwhile over here they've sort of abandoned this sort of little circle out here. It looks like Froggy's Goblin Band are going to occupy it. Acts as a little staging area. Meanwhile, let's go out here. You can see that there are still some individual Swift Blades in this mess over here, but ultimately they're just completely surrounded by Halberdiers and Orc Fellas, which does of course mean that their time is numbered. Meanwhile, you can see here the Loke Scion Rim, and they are a very efficient unit. They will hold the line very effectively. It's very difficult to push through spears with your mass, particularly an elite unit like this. And the Scion Rim of course are AP, so even if you do have some success at doing that, you're going to take more damage on the way through. And just there in the background you can see some Flag Rim and some Swift Blades ready to reinforce should they be required. There's also these Gamp Rim over here. Meanwhile, where did the cavalry go? What is that? I think that's it. The Bolgs Champions are over in the distance over there. Meanwhile, if we look over here, the Shadow Guard, after taking that charge from the Bolgs Champions, you can see that they are now engaged in melee, and they will of course rip their way through Orc Fellas, slowly but surely. And you can see these Swift Blades forming the majority of the front line over here. There are also some Gamp Rim, although they are not actually in combat directly yet, I don't think. As soon as they drop their pikes, though, these Goblin Band and these Orc Marauders are going to be struggling a little bit. You can see that over here, as a result of them engaging on multiple fronts, there's also sort of a potential gap over here that only Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are covering. As a result of engaging on multiple fronts, they're stretching the resources of the defenders more. And they won't win quickly by doing this, but ultimately they will cause the defenders more grief. And then in the late game they can let their elites do the heavy lifting and ultimately win them the battle. Meanwhile over here you can see that Lazy Couch Gamer is now doing the same, which is good. You can see that the Uruks being backed up by some Uruk halberds are colliding with this front line. And over here, the Balaguer footmen are a lesser unit. Having said that, he has quickly, Pasternak I should say, has quickly reinforced the line with some Corsairs dual swordsmen. You can actually see over here that filtering in through, I don't mind them sort of being able to sort of move through individual sections of the wall, provided it's not all of it. And also you can see that when they do, the unit tends to get split up a little bit, but there's still a lot of ranged fire being poured down onto this advancing army. There's a lot of Uruks on the way forward. The Moranon heavy maulers are coming forward as well. That might be a bit of a problem for the Umbar infantry. You can actually see that these Narun Aru Royal Archers have drawn their swords. I've never actually seen their swords up close like this, I don't think. That's kind of an interesting design. I mean, I'm sure it's practically horrible, but it's interesting at least. These Narun Aru Royal Archers need to not pursue them too far, otherwise they will get overwhelmed by Uruks, and this is not it. He spotted it, that's good. I don't want to sound pushy after all. You can see that these Balaguer halberds are sort of doing the same sort of thing. They're going to move to engage these Uruks, and they do actually have a secondary line, I believe, these savages, and they also have those... Where do those Abrazanim go? Regardless, they do have a secondary line, which does mean they can reinforce quickly. The Sauron's Will are on their way forward. The Sauron's Will are another good answer to the Umbar infantry. Umbar infantry is pretty heavily armoured, and the Sauron's Will got some good arm-piercing values on those clubs and those giant scimitars. You can see that now over here, this sort of front line is a very thick engagement, and the Uruks are very deep, and the Uruks, you know, in terms of a attritional fight, they would win this, so Umbar are going to need to commit another unit if they're going to have much success over here. Meanwhile, as part of the camp that fell, Goblin Band and Marauders are fighting against Swiftblades once more. It's not a fight they can win. And the Black Uruks, the mountains, immediately being targeted by all sorts of arrow fire. That's a good choice. Black Uruks are a decent unit, and they are very vulnerable to missiles. These Uruk halberds from Lazy Couch Gamer are moving forward as well. Let's have a look at the percentages of kills. So the defenders are winning in terms of the percentages, but that's to be expected in a situation where it's a 2v3. Later on is where the attackers should start to win. What's going on over here? These Balaguer archers presumably are out of ammo, and they're going to try and sort of chase down these Shadow Guard. As you know, they do still have their bows out. Regardless, these Shadow Guard are a decent archer unit. Don't know what they're targeting, mind you. The Abrazanim, perhaps? Not a bad choice of target. They do have HP though, so they won't die quickly. And the Shadow Guard are not AP arrows either. I mean, the Harbingers of Castamere are probably the most deadly unit you could target, but again, that's 3 HP you have to try and sort of peel your way through. The Uruks are getting very tired, but they are starting to overlap in the lines over here. So again, pressuring two fronts is starting to work out and pay dividends for the Mordor force. Meanwhile over here, these Narun Aru Royal Guards still standing strong, still with 50 men in the unit. And these Castameres chosen as well, doing the same. Still some Halberdiers backing them up, so on this initial front they've done very, very well. The Sauron's Will, on the other hand, might just be enough to tip them over the edge though. And then Umbar will need to send forward more units to cover this. And Umbar is kind of running a bit thin, because they do need to cover these flanks, and that is a sort of a virtue of having the cavalry. It does mean, of course, that you have to cover every avenue. You can't just commit fully to one choke point. You can see these Balaguer archers are in a very odd formation. They're kind of firing point blank into these Númenórean Shadow Guard. Númenórean Shadow Guard are not particularly good in the skirmish fight. They're quite lightly armoured, but you can see these Harbingers are now coming forward. And the Shadow Guard will get ripped apart by the Harbingers in melee. The ultimate light infantry killer, really. I'm struggling to think of a unit that would be better other than the Temple Inquisitors and the Elder Palace Guard at doing such a thing. These Black Uruk Warband, meanwhile, are just being butchered by Carmul's Chosen. And of course, what little protection their armour affords them, the Carmul's Chosen will almost completely negate. Well, what's going on over here? Carmul's Shadow Bows and Runic Swiftblades have won in this sort of little outer encampment over here. But now you can see that Froggy is moving forward, and that is his elite force. So the Carmul's Chosen are definitely going to be needed over there. You can see here come the Dragon's Wrath crossbows. I'm glad they're here. Honestly, the scatter shot would probably be the better choice. I mean, I would kind of like to see the fiery balls of death, but the scatter shot would probably be a good choice. Going after the Hammer Guard or the Black Guard, going to need to thin the ranks. Meanwhile, the Scion Rim have barely taken any casualties over here. I say that, they've taken probably about 25 casualties, but you can see that the Orcs, you know, they don't really stand a chance in this fight. The Goblin Band as well, the Scion Rim will hold. Meanwhile, you can see that, you know, Rune have sort of chased outside the settlement, and this has led to the Bolg champions able to get some nice cycle charges in. But ultimately, this sort of withering arrow fire is going to destroy these wargs. The Volks champions are an effective unit, but ultimately arrow fire will work on them, unlike a lot of the other sort of very strong heavy cavalry units. Meanwhile, the Harbingers of Castamere are sort of moving over to here to help out. There's also some Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen and some Loknar Rim. Master Blaster is coming forward with some Rudauer Savages. Rudauer Savages will not win in this fight, but they will of course soften the enemy up for his elites to presumably do the work for him. Meanwhile, Rune have sort of reformed their lines over here, which is good to see. Going to keep my eye on those crossbows. I don't want to miss what they do. Meanwhile, the trolls have sort of... This is very bold of the trolls. I mean, they're completely surrounded. I'm not sure what they intend to do, because at this point, going after the Nar Rim is not really worth it. I would have... In this sort of situation, I would save the trolls for the late game. So if the defenders are sort of posting up in a last stand, you can just sort of force your way through and attack in the rear. As opposed to this, which I don't know what the trolls are doing. I mean, they're just running around. What are they going for? There's savages over here. There's some Flagrim, Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen, chasing off these Uruk halberds, and presumably they will then attack this Orc force in the back. The Abrazanim Narduzagar has already turned this fight around from the front, so a lot of these Uruks are going to start to perish. You can see these trolls charging into these Corsair savages. This is actually an interesting move. It seems like what he's trying to do is just sort of run around and get charges, but ultimately the trolls are starting to die off to this AP. And here are some Balagir archers. What's going on over here? We can see that these Rudauer savages have found a little gap. The men of Rudauer are far from home. They aren't used to fighting in the desert for sure. They're going to be able to attack these Nar Rim in the side. And these axes should do a decent job against the armour that they wear. But ultimately, this is not really the best of charges.
The battle is very much in our favour. Victory will be ours.
Indeed. Oof. And dead. And he's also sending forward the Rudauer Berserkers. I can't wait for Rudauer to be their own faction. I've mentioned it before, but I really like their style. And the Rudauer Berserkers moving forward. More reinforcements are going to be needed for this line to hold back the Rudauer Berserkers, and now there's also Black Uruks. So yeah, it looks like Master Blaster is sort of sending forward his forces. See that the defenders are still winning in terms of the percentages, but in terms of the numbers on the field, I still think all of those Gundabad elites, it's so difficult to deal with that. Meanwhile, see that over here, moving through the walls on this front, we have Froggy using all of his elites. And ultimately, this is the problem that you have when you're dealing with Gundabad. And I do think that giving Gundabad this many elites in a scenario is a bit overkill. Simply because they can do things like this. They can just sort of charge forward and they can kind of attack without consequence in many ways. Simply because so many of their units have got hit points that they can afford to do this and they simply won't die. And then once they're in melee, of course, the Blackguard are so effective. They are better at AP than the Carmel's Chosen are even. So it is going to be a real problem. You can see the Guardians of Khan Doom as well with the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders. Nar Rim are being sent over to try and block their advance, but we're sort of well into the final 10,000 frames here, and I don't see how the defenders are going to be able to pull this out. The wrecking ball that is Gundabad has come forward. I don't know how they're going to sort of turn this one around. The Witch Realm Scourge Raiders and Pikemen going up against the Flag Rim. They're actually struggling a little bit because the Pikemen have not really been able to get their pikes down. And also the Scourge Raiders, they cannot do what the elite units can do in terms of charging through the lines because they're far too fragile for it. We definitely want to be getting them into a sustained melee fight. And then over here you can see that the Orc Halberdiers and the Goblin Band have tied up these Loke Scion Rim for a long time. They will lose, but ultimately these Scion Rim are not going to be much use later on in the fight when they're already overwhelmed. Over here things are kind of chaotic. Things are kind of chaos, to be honest. You can see that these Scion Rim have had victory. These Black Uruks have sort of managed to sort of sneak their way around and attack these Nar Rim. The Nar Rim, Gamp Rim, and I think there are a few Swift Blades in here as well somewhere, are not going to be able to hold against Gundabad Guard and Rudauer Berserkers. You can see that over here, Corsair Savages, Harbingers of Castamere, and Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen are very quickly going to put an end to this sort of expeditionary force of Rudauer Savages. Interestingly enough as well, over here we can see the Rudauer Axeman. This is a unit from Vanilla, which actually isn't in the game at the moment. You can't really pick them. But they are essentially reskinned Palagir Marines, of course, as I've said before. They're a neat looking unit, at least. I do wonder if they will make a return when Rudauer becomes their own faction. I know the concept of them will, in terms of A lot of javelins. These Númenórean Shadow Guard being poked to death by the Naru Na'aru Royal Guard. The Melkor's Chosen, can they get in behind the enemy lines? The Belagir Footman is definitely not going to be able to defeat them. The Melkor's Chosen could just punch their way through here, and then that would pretty much be game over. The Corsair Black Guards have been doing their thing. And we've got here the Dragon's Wrath crossbows. I don't know if they've been firing. They definitely need to. They need to fire a few volleys into these Guardians. Start to destroy them. I mean, they're running away, but all they're doing is going to make the Guardians of Khan Doom follow them into the Umbar half of the encampment. Things are not looking good for the defenders at this point. Again, similar situation to last time. They simply don't have the men to hold every avenue. Like I said early on, if you use all of the avenues of attack that you have at your disposal as the attackers in this sort of situation, a scenario will usually go in your favour. It's usually how they're made.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half
Dragon's Wrath
their
crossbows
men.
reloading, Belagir archers reloading. The archers will not do a ton of damage to these. The Dragon's Wrath crossbow. The problem is they can't fire their arrows quickly enough. Again, the regular arrows are not going to do a lot to the Guardians of Khan Doom. They have enormous shields, hit points, very well armoured as well. Meanwhile, over here, you can see that Mordor are running for the hills. They have been defeated on one choke point at least, but the Temple Inquisitors have yet to rear their ugly heads. You can see that these Naru Na'aru Royal Guard, they're still here. There's still 43 of them, and there's also still 20 Castamir's Chosen. And they're still looking like they're going to have victory against another wave of Mordor Moran on Uruk. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing Umbar are good at. It's just a shame that in sort of a competitive sense, Umbar are not really that great in the current patch. But when they're in a sort of fight like this, they can really hold their own. Flag Rim, Abrazanim Nadu Tariq have been fighting for a little while on this front as well. There aren't very many of them left, presumably because the Melkor's Chosen have been slowly shredding them with their giant maces. And they are winded. There are still Halberdiers alive. Meanwhile, these Belagir footmen are falling back, it looks like, but that's going to leave an avenue into the encampment for the Melkor's Chosen to exploit. You can see that, well, defenders are still winning in terms of percentages. This could still go either way. I do still think that because of all of the sort of gaps in the defenders' defences, they will probably lose this. Also simply because of the elites that the attackers have available to them. You can actually see that the good thing we came over here, because this fight has turned around pretty dramatically. The Flag Rim and the Nar Rim that turned around have managed to sort of, Froggy's elites are probably going to die here. That would be a sort of mini victory at least. The Carmel's Chosen need to stay alive if they're going to manage it. But the Flag Rim providing a bit of extra AP. Gundabad Guard nearly all dead. It's possible that they've taken Dragon's Wrath crossbow fire when I haven't been looking. Where are the Dragon's Wrath crossbows? I've lost them. Oh no, there they are. I would assume that they've been doing work running around the battlefield. I just haven't seen them do it. You can see that these Flag Rim have moved over here, and these Guardians of Khan Doom are in a very thin formation. So the Flag Rim will actually hold their own in this sort of fight. The extra AP that the Flag Rim do is going to be very important, but meanwhile over here you can see that in a similar story to what happened on the other side, the Black Guard, of course, Master Blaster sent forward his elites and has basically breached the defences all over the place. If we look over here, these Scion Rim still slowly but surely chewing their way through what was the initial assault over there. And you can see that the Melkor's Chosen ultimately did come in through this way when the spears abandoned their post. And that's going to lead to these archers. Again, the archers have probably already paid for themselves in terms of kills, so it's probably not the worst thing. Rear-charging the front lines over here definitely will be something that they can't really afford, though. And the Melkor's Chosen, especially with the Temple Inquisitors from the front, the Black Númenóreans coming forth en masse, and this is going to sort of crumble the Umbar front line, I have a feeling. You can see that the gap is closing. It's just 11% now. Abrazani Nardubawib, I think is the way you pronounce it, not Nardubawib. They are trying their best to shoot these guys down, but the Melkor's Chosen, so tanky, so many hit points. Oh, there goes the Javelins, though, the Corsair Blackguards, and the AP on those will cut the Melkor's Chosen down to size. 8 of them gone in a single volley. The Corsair Blackguards could yet be an ace in the hole. Look at that. That's brutal. There goes the Nazgul. Very odd death pose. Corsair Blackguard's very good in melee, of course. Can they yet swing this fight? What's going on over here? Where are the Dragon's Wrath crossbows? Here they are. What's going to go on over here? Will they use the fireballs? Well, no, because there's one Melkor chosen. Go on, Dragon's Wrath. Kill him. Well, that was very unfortunate. I see what he was trying to do, but... And this is ultimately going to mean that Master Blaster is going to ruin everything by not allowing the Dragon's Wrath crossbows to use their fireballs. Come on. They're right there. You could turn this battle around by yourselves. Do it. Well, you can see over there that Rune has essentially won on that front. I mean, a well-placed fireball volley into Master Blaster's elites could turn this battle on its head. Can they do it? That is the question. I mean, these blackguards have got their javelins ready. What are these guys doing? No. Turn around. Shoot. Here they go. This is it. For death and glory. No, don't spin around on the spot.
Our army is tiring.
You can see over there that Mordor, Moran on Uruks. Over there with the Temple Inquisitors is going to be a real problem. These Dragon's Wrath crossbows. I don't want to leave their position though. You can see that these Scourge Raiders are coming forward. Presumably to try and interrupt the Javelin volleys. Getting a decent hit there though. What are the Dragon's Wrath crossbows actually doing? This is infuriating. The only time you use the fireball, it cooks most of your unit. You can see over here Guardians of Khan Dûn coming forward to back the Witch Realm Scourge Raiders up. See there's some Flagrim and Gamprim trying to sort of stop this Gundabad Death Ball from gaining any more momentum. And these Carmels chosen presumably going to try and attack it from the rear. What are these Dragon's Wrath crossbows going to do? Are they going to try and attack the Mordor position? Come on. Well, there goes the Umbar General at the hands of the Temple Inquisitors, no less. The General, I think, was in the Archer unit. Right, come on. Come on, crossbows. Now is your time. They're spinning around. They're doing the shuffle that artillery does when they can't decide where they want to attack. And ultimately these Moran on Uruks are pouring in. And these Dragon's Wrath crossbows, it's painful to watch this. Bobo, just run them outside the settlement and attack them in the rear. Don't just keep them in here. You can't shoot over the heads of your own men with these guys. Meanwhile, over here, the Witch Realm Hammer Guard victory seems certain against the Nar Rim. There's another unit of Hammer Guard clattering into the back of these Carmels chosen. It is ultimately going to mean they're going to get cut down pretty effectively. You can see that now it's within 1%. And here we are, the closing stages of the battle. The defences are falling. The fireballs were needed, and they were not forthcoming. Come on, this is it. This is your last opportunity I'm giving you, crossbows. If you keep sort of spinning around on the spot, I'm going to abandon you for all time. Right, that's it. You have failed me. Now and forever. What is going on over here? You can see the Temple Inquisitors leading the way, just slicing their way through this Umbar defence. And Umbar ultimately had no answer to this. They had to commit their elites early to hold back the numbers. And that was kind of the story of this battle. The defenders, they just couldn't deal with the amount of elites that the attackers had. I don't think they did a great deal wrong, the defenders, either. Yes, they could have laid out their defences a little bit better so they weren't breached quite so dramatically. There's the fireballs. Too little, too late, though, and I think most of that was actually Mordor Moran on Uruks. Another volley of fiery justice. There we go. Crispy. Temple Inquisitors taking quite a lot of losses there, but ultimately enough of them are still alive that the Dragon's Wrath crossbows should live. Or should lose, not should live. They definitely won't be living after this battle. The Belagir footmen surrounded on all sides by Moran on Uruks. And the outcome is pretty clear. The announcer is correct. These Corsair Blackguards, though, victory seems certain against Scourge Raiders and Guardians of Khan Dûn. They are no pushovers. Definitely one of the best units Umbar has available to them. They melted those Melkors chosen as well. Very effective indeed. Well, what's going on over here? The Scion Rim that were out there were ultimately surrounded and destroyed. If we're looking over here, the Death Ball of Gundabad has taken a lot of losses, to be fair, and they did manage to stop Froggy's death stack. But they couldn't do it a second time, and these Flag Rim ultimately find themselves completely outclassed, excuse me. Still some Rudauer Axemen alive. That's pretty impressive, considering their lower tier. They get to march with the Death Ball. How about that? And over here we can see ultimately the fireballs were too late, and the Dragon's Wrath crossbows are now being overwhelmed in melee by the Temple Inquisitors and their Uruk followers. You can see pouring into the settlement more Uruk archers that are out of ammunition, just pulling out their swords. Engaging these Abrazanim in melee. And while I may not be the biggest fan of these guys in the current patch, the Nadu Bawib are one of the cooler looking archers in the game. With that mask. With the mask and everything, it reminds me of the style that the Devor have from Medieval Kingdoms 1212. They're probably my favourite looking unit in that mod. They look so cool. Might do a bit of 1212 at some point. Maybe. If you want it. You can see these Moranon Uruks continually just pressurising these Nadu Bawib. They're still trying to sort of release their payload of arrows as quickly as they can. And they are shooting into the backs of the Temple Inquisitors, trying to get a few more kills on those Black Numenorians. Let's have a look over here. The Balagir Footman surrounded. Ultimately it's going to be a doomed hope for them. The Flag Rim are destroyed. The Blackguards' victory seems certain for the time being, but now the Witchround Blackguards have come to destroy the Corsair Blackguards. And the Corsair Blackguards are good, but they're not good enough to defeat Witchround Blackguard, especially not when they're accompanied by every elite unit in Gundabad's roster. And ultimately here comes the last stand of the Dragon's Wrath crossbowman with their large waved swords.
We will smash the enemy.
Is he trying to run away? I think he is, you know. It says they're reloading, which is interesting. Look at these guys. They do look cool. They've got the same armour model as the Carmel's Chosen, I believe, only they have the gold armour, unlike the Carmels, who opt for a steel armour. And ultimately the Orcs are going to have victory here in this scenario. It's an interesting idea for a scenario. I like it where you've got this very hastily constructed makeshift encampment. There are gaps in your defences and you have to sort of react to it accordingly. I do think that maybe the attackers had a bit too much of an advantage here. The sheer amount of elite units that Gundabad had, for example, was a little bit overkill. If one of the armies had that, fine, but ultimately both of them had that, and it ultimately made this battle a bit of a foregone conclusion, in my opinion. I think that maybe something quite neat to do would be to have it a 4v2 and have the four armies just be almost entirely lower tier, with like a few elites, very few elites, and see how that goes. Because that would really give you the impression of sort of you're making your last stand in a hastily constructed encampment, and you're sort of cutting down Orcs by the 100. But ultimately, will it be enough? That sort of feel would be quite interesting, I think. And while the Temple Inquisitors, despite taking fireballs to the face, are still doing a very good job, and ultimately the Nadu Bawib have broken. And this is going to be the end of the fight, I think. I think the Blackguards are going to be the last ones left alive before the defenders. There are only 5 of them left, though. Actually, no, it's going to be the it's actually going to be the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, simply because they're up against Mordor Moranon Uruks, and the Moranon Uruks don't have the attack stats to finish them off quickly. Ultimately, I think that this is going to be the end, though. Well, I know it is, because there's only 400 frames left. Eager and exhausted. He's still eager. Fair play to him. Fight on, brave warrior. Of course, the Moranon units will not be a thing as such in the next patch. They will simply be the upgraded variant of the standard Uruks. I've always thought that the Moranon sort of Uruk armor looked a little bit weird. But again, you know, you don't expect like sort of fine craftsmanship from the Orcs, and they are celebrating and chanting and that sort of thing, and they have victory. Rune getting significantly more kills than Umbar, presumably simply because of the ranged sort of contingent that he had, although that is a surprising discrepancy even so. So look, so this is Master Blaster's army. Casualties inflicted mostly from the Guardians of Khan Doom there. Interesting, or is it? Yes, that is, I think, anyway. Actually, no, that was Froggy's army, so that's Guardians of Khan Doom. Master Blaster's army, on the other hand, still Guardians of Khan Doom got the most kills. So there you go. So yeah, this was the quote-unquote Christmassy one. Obviously, it was in the desert. But yeah, this one should be out on Christmas Eve. And then there will be a little bit of a gap, obviously, because of Christmas things before the next video. Mainly because I imagine there won't be too much in the way of scenarios going on Christmas Day and Boxing Day anyway. So yes, I wish you all a Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope you'll join me for whatever is next after the holidays are over.